Carlos. Thanks for joining me today on the Minimalist Moms podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. This is so cool.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about your book, Reconnected. When I heard about this book, I knew that I wanted to have you on. I heard that you had gone away for 2 weeks with monks, 2 weeks into the Amish countryside of Ohio. And then I think you took 2 weeks away from your phone with your family when you got back. But all that to
Yes.
say, getting disconnected in today's day and age for 6 weeks is a big feat. And so I had to have you on to talk about this experience. But before we get there, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners and then we'll get started.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me. I am Carlos Enrique Whittaker is what my mom would call me when I was in trouble as a young child. And I'm a father of 3. I live in Nashville, Tennessee with my wife. 2 of the 3 still live at home. And yeah, I write books, talk about them for a living, tell stories on the internet or on stages that hopefully are going to lead people towards fixing something in their life in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, I have a good time doing what I do. But honestly, at the end of the day, like, my parents, this is a big one. My parents, I just moved them in a year ago across the street from me. So now I've got my mom and dad across the street after not living near them for like 25 years. So like, it's just this really sweet season of like simplicity and family. And suddenly I'm like, wow, all the things that used to be important really aren't as important as they used to be. And so what a great time, I think, in conversation to jump into. I think a lot of people are feeling the pain point of what we'll be talking about, and so I kind of decided to go all in on it. So yeah, but that's who I am, what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that you started with that because you say in your book, I know we weren't made for so much screen time simply because we're more connected and yet more divided than we've ever been.
Yeah.
So there's this conundrum that we're experiencing right now where we feel connected. And yet you talk about some friends, which actually I'll let you go ahead and share it about these friends that you were not even necessarily wanting to connect with anymore because of the connectivity.
Oh goodness. Listen, we all have globally gone through trauma together the last 4 years, right? Like we've as the human race gone through this together. And I think we've kind of bumped off course just a little bit as we're kind of putting things back together again after just this rage ecosystem that we found ourselves existing in. And I one of the things that I found was that I started thinking about, okay, when are all the times that I feel the most angry? Like when are all the like that I feel the most rage? And it was never when I was sitting with somebody across from them, even if I deeply disagreed with the person, it was never when I was away from my phone. It was always the rage was coming from looking at my screen. And so yeah, I share a story where it's funny, that story was a while ago where I went down a we invited some friends over, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen them in a while. And then I went on her Twitter account, I think. And then next thing I was like, oh, she tweeted that. Well, I wonder what she thinks about this. And next thing you know, before they even get here, I'm like, I don't even know how to have dinner with them because I don't, suddenly they became a caricature instead of an actual human. And so that's not something that I think, I've solved. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I'm still having to figure this out myself. Like, I just feel like maybe we know too much. Like, I don't know if we were ever created to know what every neighbor believes about every political issue. But now we've got this app called Nextdoor that is like the worst thing on the planet because now I'm like, oh, the brown house 4 houses down. Well, I know because of the Nextdoor app that they're going to vote for this. But I'm like, we weren't supposed to know this stuff, And so, yeah, we're in a, if we're not careful, we can find ourselves swimming in this rage ecosystem that I'm trying to help people get away from.
Absolutely. So many paths I could take with this. I did do a post on that very thing about a year ago, just this access of information that we have to people that we never had unless we were in personal relationship with them. Like we didn't have the comparison trap of what were they driving? What kind of purse did they have? What did their living rooms look like? And it just does leave us feeling this not enoughness. So I definitely agree with you, but also another post I just did for the month of September, I try to give people micro habits. And I told people if the political news is starting to make you dislike your neighbor, it's time to turn it off. And I
Yes.
honestly wrote that one for myself because I
Mm.
felt pretty neutral now that we're a few years out from the last election.
Right, right.
And I was like, I've overcome these feelings. And then they're slowly starting to slip back in. And I don't like that about myself. I don't want to
Mm.
feel that way. It doesn't align with what I say I want to pursue, of who I want to be. And so it is important, if you feel that because of connectivity, shut it off, shut it down.
Absolutely. And I love that you're giving people these micro habits to do. Like, it's so important that we change our habits. It's so important that we
Mhm.
literally know that we can change our behaviors that are allowing these thoughts and these feelings to come in. One of the things that I've decided to do, similar with you, is, I was just consuming the news constantly on my phone,
Yeah.
just consume, consume, consume. And again, I don't think we were created to know everything we know. So what I did is I deleted X off my phone. I
Mhm.
deleted the news apps off my phone, and I subscribed to a newspaper. So now the only time I read the news is in the morning. Just I still don't know who throws it in my front yard, what time they do it, but somebody does. I walk out and there it is, and I pick it up and I read the paper, and just like it's 1984, it's
Mhm.
glorious. And then if something else happens on planet Earth, I'll find out tomorrow morning, and I won't have to be mad about it all day long. So yeah, I think there's a lot of little habits that we can shift. And that is one thing that I tried to do in the book at the end of every chapter, is really give, I love your term, these micro habits that people
Mhm.
can grab a hold of, some handlebars, and just do these small little implementations in their days that I think will really drastically change their amount of screen time.
Yeah, and I know not everyone necessarily agrees with us of tuning it out, because then we become these ignorant souls that are
Sure.
unaware and uninformed. However, even looking to the past, like, they didn't have that. So why do we think we can manage it now? Just because we have the access doesn't mean we need it, doesn't mean that we
No,
should have the access.
it's so true. The statement that I say when I speak
Hmm.
is, our souls and our psyche were not created with the capacity to consume the amount of content we consume. And
Yes.
honestly, like, even like evolutionists that don't even believe in my worldview of God or whatever it is, would
Hmm.
agree that if we look at the rise of anxiety and mental health woes that are happening, like, they're directly correlated, I think, and linked to knowledge and the amount of content that we're consuming. And there was a study done that I put in my last book that shows that the first 15 minutes we're awake and the last 15 minutes we're awake in our day, since we're using our phones as our alarm clocks, we're consuming more content than my great grandparents' generation did in a month. So that's, I mean, it's crazy to think, as we're scrolling, all of the things we're consuming, they didn't have the availability to consume that much news. And so they just consumed what it was that was newsworthy for them in their, I mean, when I was at the monastery, again, I wasn't connected. So like, all I had the capacity for was to consume what was happening to the monks around me. And like, oh, I knew that Father Dominic was sick, so I was going to go pray for him. Oh, I was going to go like check out Father Carlos, and everything that I had the capacity for was within like 300 yards of me at all times. And I just think, if you go back 200 years to the dawn of humanity, that's really all we knew. And so again, I'm not saying we need to be ignorant, we need to be dumb, we don't need to care about world issues, but I am saying we need to be careful about how much of it that we're consuming.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the monks, because that was one of my first questions for you. Why the monks? Why the Amish? So tell me
Yes,
about it.
yes. Yeah, so for sure, the first at the beginning of this experiment, I call it an experiment. It actually wasn't an experiment because I was the only data point, right? So there's no science behind it. But I went straight from basically 7.5 hours a day on my phone,
Mhm.
to moving to St. Andrew's Abbey, to 23 hours a day of silence. And we could speak during lunch. But besides that, I would chant during, or kind of pray out loud with them in the 6 prayer times a day. And the reason I went to the monks was that my wife's father was actually like a high capacity volunteer at this monastery, at this abbey. So my
Oh.
wife grew up kind of running around the grounds all the time. And when I was thinking about a place to do this, she's like, well, you should go to St. Andrew's Abbey. Like, I used to go there as a little girl. So it was incredible. My wife literally calls the Abbey phone and asks for Abbot Francis, and she starts explaining my father Bill, and she's on speakerphone. Abbot Francis just starts laughing, this big belly laugh. Oh, little Heather, I remember you when you used to run around the grounds. And it was so cool. So like, we had this personal connection. So she asked they allowed me, they had to kind of go up the chain a little bit because normally they let people stay for 2 nights, but I was asking for 2 weeks. And so, yeah, they let me stay there. And I mean, listen, I'll be blunt. It was awful. Like the first 4 days were awful. It's not like, all of these people that are like, oh, if I could just, you've lived my dream. If I could just get away and like live it. And I was like, no, you don't understand. When you can't get out of your own head because you don't have anywhere to go, like I didn't have anything to scroll. My worries were just there and they wouldn't go away anywhere. And so it took about 3 or 4 days to get over that initial, really it was, I was like coming off of a drug, right? This drug called knowledge. And it took about 4 days to come off of that. And then it was like literally the greatest 6.5 weeks of my life. Like after that, it was no longer about a phone. It was about the monks and the relationship with the monks and what they were teaching me. And it was awesome. So like, I'm pretty blessed to be able to have done it.
Yeah. So the only time, I mean, there's been a handful of times I'll say, but I have had the ability, I'm sorry to the listeners, I've shared this before, but I did this thing called floating. It's where you go into this float tank. It's like stuffed
Yes, I've
with
heard.
water. Yeah. So I did that for an hour and you're right. The thoughts that you have, I mean, you described it in your book. You said you can't just numb yourself with social media. Your thoughts are yours to sit with. And that's what was happening to me. So, and I'm not someone that's like privy to, like, I don't have a history of panic attacks or mental health struggles. So did you have a tendency towards that was exacerbated by this silence? Tell me about that.
Absolutely. So I definitely had a history of anxiety, and panic attacks and things like that. But legitimately, maybe a decade before, like I'd done so much work and I'd like found healing and like all of this incredible stuff. So like that was the last thing I thought was going to be, happening. And it was actually more of what I found out later when I went back to the neuroscientist that scanned my brain. He said, no, you weren't having panic attacks. You were detoxing. Like your brain was legitimately detoxing off of this drug, these dopamine hits, all of these things that you're used to, and you no longer had it anymore. So what people need to understand is we will have physical manifestations of anxiety, whether it's heart palpitations or sweats or tight chest or these things. And he's like, this is backed by science now. Like if somebody leaves their phone at home, they have a physical reaction to that, like in their bodies. And you were just doing that. So it really was like, yeah, there was definitely like physical things that were happening, anxiety symptoms that were happening because I had no screens anymore. I had no availability. There was no availability for me to know everything that was happening. And I think now, hindsight, I think initially I would have been like, yeah, I was coming off the drug of my phone or whatever it was, or screens. I think now it was more control. Like it was this facade that we think we are somehow earn more control when we have these devices, control over everything, our teenagers, our finances, our jobs, our, all of these things we really think we're in control of, but we're really not. And when it gets taken away, whoo, that was pretty shocking to my whole self.
Yes, I think it is your first chapter. It's about identity and how much of our identity is wrapped up in these devices for you and I, if we are more forward facing on social media, to
Yeah.
step away. You were like, when I was writing my final post, it was going to be difficult to not be thought of. Like
Yeah.
my identity was rooted in that. And maybe
Yeah.
I didn't even have an idea of that. So how did you wrestle with that? Just not being thought of. That's
Yeah.
it.
What a great, I mean, I like the way you actually said that, not being thought of. I haven't said it that way, but that really is the wrestle. Where suddenly, I need to let every single person know, even if you have 10 million followers, then you're listening to this right now. If you don't post on your social media for a few days, nobody is going to notice. Like there's so many millions and billions of people that will just slide in and fill that out, that suddenly I realized, wow, like that's a space that I'm actually like, although people may like me and they may like what I have to say and it may be helpful to them when I say things, like I cannot in any way, shape, or form continue to build my identity of who I am based on their responses to me, based on all of these things, because it got taken away. Let me tell you, not a single monk knew who I was. Not a single Amish person knew who I was. And so I was starting from like ground zero on all of the relationships I were having were just based on me. and
Mhm.
based on the like who I truly was, not this facade that I was creating. Whereas again, anybody that's forward facing on social media knows that like we're still creating this caricature of who we are, for the world to see. It can never be exactly perfect. And so yeah, there was a lot of identity. Again, the book, anybody of any faith can, I think it's a pain point that anybody is going to touch with. But I do speak from the worldview of my faith.
Mhm.
And so, I had to wrestle with, okay, who does God think I am versus who do these followers think I am? And there was a lot of that wrestling going on. I was grateful that I went to the monastery first because it was such a shock to my system to go from 7.5 hours a day on my phone to 23 hours a day of silence. Like there was a lot to mess in my head and my soul, a lot of stuff kind of unraveling, and then me kind of having to build it back up again. And I think the whole book would have been different had I gone to the Amish first, as
Mhm.
opposed to going to the monastery first.
Oh, absolutely. That would make sense. So
Yeah.
you say identity isn't as much about finding me as finding we. Did I say that right?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, finding the we.
Yeah.
So I'm curious that how it was different when you went to Amish country, what the we looked like there. I'm assuming you were helping out on the farm.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Going from the monastery to the Amish felt like moving from a cave to Manhattan. Like it literally, like I was like, I'm moving to Mount Hope, Ohio, a 4-way stop in the middle of Amish country.
Uh-huh.
And it felt like it was the Amish go hard. I mean, they love to visit. They love to talk. They love to go, go, go. I mean, we were up sun up 5 a.m. before the sun came up, and I'm, having my hour and a half breakfast with Willis before we'd even get out to the farm, and where every meal lasts an hour and a half, and we're just talking, and then we go out and I'm shearing the sheep, and then I'm like, we're cutting the hay, and then we're doing that, and then we're riding the e-bikes 20 miles to go visit Ed at his barn so we can do it was a complete shock to my system, but I loved it because what the Amish did so well that they were teaching me, whereas when I was at the monks, I was learning about solitude. I was learning about savoring. I was learning about Godspeed, slowing down, all these things. What I learned with the Amish was the we part of it, was
Mhm.
what does community look like? Why do the Amish make the decisions that they make when it comes to technology? One of the first things I learned, when I got there was like, wait a second, I feel like I'm meeting all these Amish people, and they all kind of have different. Some of them have a flip phone. Some of them don't have a flip phone. Some of them are
Mhm.
using e-bikes. Some of them are using horse and buggies. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. Before I even start this whole Amish thing, I need somebody to explain to me, like, who's making the rules here? Like, what's happening? And what I loved is Willis said, Carlos. So
Mhm.
every church kind of has the elders that make the rules for the church.
Mhm.
And Amish are always going to be as conservative can be. They're trying to conserve their way of living, but
Mhm.
every decision they make with technology, and I love this, and I've implemented this into my life. Every decision they make with technology, they make with the perspective of, is this piece of technology going to bring us closer together to we, or
Mhm.
farther apart from we? And
Okay.
so that's what they're like. That's why we'll never have cars, because cars, I could end up in Cleveland, Ohio, looking at something, and if Miss Betty's barn burns down, we
Oh.
won't be able to fix it in 2 days flat like we can now, because we're never going to be that far away from each other. So whether
Mm.
it be screens or flip phones or whatever, is this piece of technology going to bring us closer together or take us farther apart? That's one of the things I loved about the Amish.
Mhm. Absolutely. So taking what you learned in those 2 environments back into your regular life in Nashville,
Yeah.
was it difficult, one, to acclimate back into day to day? And then I guess what were the challenges that you faced of, like, falling back into old habits?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, gosh. So I did 2 weeks with the monks, 2 weeks with the Amish, and then 3 weeks with my family before I went back to my phone. And I'll tell you that those 3 weeks where I didn't look at a screen when I was with my family were, I mean, this is from my kids' mouths. Like, Dad, you're the purest version of you. This is the purest version of you we've ever, and again, they were 18, 17 at the
Mhm.
time, that we've ever experienced. And it's true. Like it was just me. There was never one single notification that went off when I was looking them in the eyes. Nothing
Mhm.
buzzed on my body, nothing dinged in the background.
Mhm.
Now they were still on their phones. They were still watching Netflix themselves. I just removed myself from the room. But Absolutely not. There when I had no phone and I was with them, my wife calls it Amish Carlos. She's like, I love Amish Carlos. Like this version of you is like, oh my gosh, you know. And you know, the night before I flew back to LA to get my brain rescanned to get my phone back, you know,
Mhm.
we cried. Like
Mhm.
she's like, I'm. I mean, she was like, this is sad that
Mhm.
we're not going to have this anymore. And so you know, I go back and I get my phone back, and it took me about 3 days to turn it back on. Like after I was supposed to turn it on, because I was so content. I was so happy. But again, I make my living talking to my phone, right? Like I had to turn it back on. Um, so what I thought was going to be, okay, I've got to build all of these rules in my life. I've got to
Mhm.
build all of these things. Okay, I'm going to have my phone here. I'm going to put screen time. Actually, none of that was necessary. And let me tell you why, because I had fallen in love with these hour and a half long meals with the Amish, to where we disagreed on a lot of things, and we
Mhm.
were having deep conversations, disagreeing in front of each other, but over a shared love of meals. And so the disagreements were always covered with all these other things that we loved, and we found
Mhm.
17 things we'd agreed on and 3 things we disagree on over the course of an hour and a half. Solitude, noticing, getting lost and finding my way. I no longer use maps when I go somewhere. I write it down before I leave my house, and then I'll, if I'm stuck in traffic, then maybe I'm supposed to be stuck in traffic.
Hmm.
Savoring, all noticing, all of these things on the other side of my phone that I fell back in love with. Like it's like when I turn my phone back on, I didn't, like I was more in love with those things than I was with my phone at that point. So
Mhm.
not to say that I don't ever get, you know, sucked into TikTok anymore. And next thing you know, like 2 hours later, you know, I'm just laughing at all these trends or whatever. But it is so rare. And what I love is that I didn't create any new set of rules in my life. I just, it was those 7 weeks where I fell back in love with kind of, I think, how we're supposed to be living. That
Mhm.
once you taste something so good, you just don't want to lose that taste again, right? And so,
Mhm.
um, yes, there's a lot of I think small habits that I give people that we can place in our lives. But I think once people start tasting those things, really, I just pick my phone up less. I'm on my phone 3 hours a day now instead of 7.5 hours. And I've made zero rules about don't use your phone here. Don't pick, I just don't pick it up near as much, because I'd much rather be doing what I learned from the Amish and the monks.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you started with the calculations of what that time adds up to in a life. And I think even just keeping that on like a little sticky
Oh,
somewhere on the phone is so important to look back at to give us that prefrontal cortex reminder.
absolutely. I mean, think about it, right? We all get that notification on Sundays. It slides
Mhm.
across our phone, whether you have an Android phone or an iPhone, and it tells you what you average a day. This is what
Yeah.
I've I've tried to figure out how to get a hold of someone at Apple or Google to fix it. I'm like, that's not helping anybody.
Yeah.
If that thing were to slide across my screen on Sundays, and instead of saying you average 7 hours and 23 minutes of screen time a day, if instead it said, if you live to be 85, you will spend 11 and a half years staring at your phone, because that's actually what the math does. I
Yeah.
think that's going to be a lot more sobering when you do the math than just the daily average screen time.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that people, I don't know, for the last 60 years, 50 years have been watching television. So maybe we opt out of television and opt into the
Mm,
mindless scrolling and we find it that way. However,
yeah.
yeah, I think when it's just put into perspective like that, we could be connecting with our kids, we could be reading, we could be learning, we could be trying a new sport, whatever, fill in the blank
Yeah.
that you're passionate about that you don't think you can do, but it's like, oh, I actually do have the time. It's just that
Yes.
perspective shift.
Yes. No, I mean, I legitimately went from 7.5 to 3. So what did
Mhm.
that do? That literally gave me half my life back. Like it gave me
Yeah.
it probably gave me years. I actually need to do that math, because it gave
Yeah.
me years back that now, oh, what am I going to do with, I should start like a freaking mastermind e-course for $14,000 telling people I can give you a decade back of your life. All you've got to do is look at your phone less. You know?
Yeah.
So,
So, just some practical takeaways for the listeners. I'm going to ask you one that I struggle with. So,
yeah.
I definitely try to put my phone away when I'm with my friends.
Yeah.
However, we'll be talking about something and I jump to my phone to grab Google so I can Google that person, or I want to show you this
Yeah.
picture. How do you cut down on just the times that you pick it up every day?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, first, let me speak to what you just spoke of, because that's something that I think everyone has a tendency to do. And I have a whole
Mhm.
chapter on wondering, and
Mhm.
how wondering is uniquely human, and we've lost it. It's literally become extinct, because when someone says I wonder and you're with a group of friends, what do? You pull your phone out and it's the wonder killer. And so instead I'm like, hey, actually, whenever someone says I wonder and someone pulls their phone out, I'm like, nope, we're just gonna wonder. We're
Uh,
not gonna find the, and we're gonna, and we start talking about it. Well, I think this, the conversations are awesome. The ideas that come out are awesome. So first of all, I tell people, if you ever hear anyone say I wonder, this will cut your screen time. Don't let anyone pick up their phone. You just have to get stuck wondering, right? And so, like, stay in that wonderland, even if it's for an hour, then you
mhm.
can look it up later. um
Mhm.
but there are a whole bunch of things that I've implemented into my life, because it just feels better to live this way, that have cut my screen time down. I simply, let's just talk about my evening and my morning time now. So, like,
Mhm.
I no longer charge my phone in my bedroom. I charge
Okay.
it in the kitchen, and I bought this really cool thing from the 1980s called an alarm clock, and it's sitting next to my bed, and all it does is wake me up, right, and tell me what time it is. And so, I wake up in the morning. I don't have notifications waiting for me. I walk out. I make my cup of coffee. I still don't pick up my phone, and I
Mhm.
just have my cup of coffee. And guess what? When you just have a cup of coffee, it tastes so much better than when
Mm.
you're scrolling email and drinking your coffee. So I just have the cup of coffee. Then I go out to my front yard and I get my newspaper and I read the news.
Mhm.
And I get my information. I get my worldview. I get to see what's happening on planet Earth. But then that's it. Like, if something else happens I need to know about in the world, someone's going to tell me. and
Mhm.
and so, like, my mornings have just become slower. They've just become, I'm able to savor coffee. There's a whole chapter on savoring as well. So, like, from getting an alarm clock to not looking at your phone, at least for the first hour that you wake up, to drinking your coffee without scrolling, to deleting X off your phone. If you got to put it on your phone, put it on your phone for an hour and then re-delete it again.
Mhm.
Those are some simple things that I've done. But then I also, like, I put my phone on do not disturb permanently. So my phone is
Mhm.
legitimately permanently on do not disturb, which means my phone will never buzz or ding. Now, I figured out a way that if my family, and they know this, if they need to get a hold of me, if four human beings, my wife and my three kids, if they call me, like actual call me, not
Mhm.
text me, then my phone will come through. Bzz. And so I
Mhm.
know, oh, a family member's calling. I need to answer this. But if anyone texts me, any of the notifications, I just no longer know if I get notified until I pick my phone up. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, look, there's 7 notifications. But suddenly, like, all of these things have made me in charge of my screen time. And I promise you, if you just implement a few of these, you will see a drastic shift
Mhm.
in the amount of time that you're picking your phone up.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, it is like this FOMO that you have, this fear of missing out.
Totally.
What did I miss? And again, did people miss me? And
Right.
the answer is likely no. They probably didn't miss you. Maybe they'll miss you in a few weeks.
Sure.
They
Sure.
probably didn't, because you're not the center of the universe, and
No.
feel like we are. So I do think these things make us feel like we carry a heavier weight. Again, going back to that identity piece, that ego-centric
Yes.
piece of who we are. Again, it's not all bad, but I think
No.
we just start to bring the awareness. So many people are talking about this right now, and it's
Yeah.
because it's an important shift that needs to be made in our culture, our society.
Absolutely. And again, I believe there is room, and it is necessary to know a little bit of the dangers, right? You if
Mhm.
the anxious generation, there's books out there that really warn us of some things.
Yeah.
But what I hope people get out of this story is they're going to realize really quickly, oh, this book isn't about why phones are bad. It's why it's so beautiful on the other side of the phone. And I'm really hoping that that perspective is something that people really resonate with and go, oh, you know what? There's 22 things in this book that
Mhm.
really I think are going to make me happier, not stress me out. And so I'm going to give this thing a shot. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely a conversation for such a time as this. And I think a lot of people are feeling the need to do something about it. So,
Yes, absolutely. Some other chapters in the book: perspective, notice, and wonder, being, solitude, beholding, control, presence. Where can listeners grab a copy and dive deeper into this book if they want to do so?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So the cool thing is if you go to reconnectedbook.com, which is the name of my book, there it'll take you to all the different, places that you can pick up the book. But I'm giving away like some freebies on there. Like I'll give you a journaling guide if you go there. I've got a whole documentary coming out in
Mm,
October based on the book. And so I'll give you a 10-minute sneak peek into the documentary.
love.
And so, yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff you can get there. Or again, you can go to, I mean, it's everywhere. And it's actually, this is cool. It's going to be in all the Hudson bookseller stores and airports. So as you're
Oh,
traveling around, look for a picture of me on the cover with an Amish hat, and that'll be the book. I'll be there waiting for you. So yeah, it's available everywhere. And if you do the Audible thing, I read it to you. So I didn't hire another person. It's just me talking to you, and
mm,
I'll read it to you as well there.
cool. And then where can they connect with you online?
Yes, absolutely. Probably Instagram is the best place to hang out with me at
Okay.
Loswhit, Loswhit. I'm on Instagram most of the time. If I'm ever like, want to like argue or complain, then I'll go to X. But most of the time, you want to make sure you're hanging out with me on Instagram. That's the more fun place.
Okay. Well, Carlos, I don't think that anyone told you, but at the end of every episode, I ask my guests two questions. And the first
Oh,
one is, what has been a beneficial resource in your life that you want to share with the listeners?
oh my gosh. Just in general, just a
Yep.
beneficial resource.
Anything. Yeah, you could say spend 2 weeks with the Amish. I don't know
I
if it's
could.
super accessible, but
I could say that. Actually, and again, this is going to come back from my time with the monks.
okay.
But this was a Benedictine monastery, which means they follow the rules of Saint Benedict.
Mhm.
And I have found that you can just order a little pamphlet of the rules of Saint Benedict. It
Hmm.
actually is so helpful. And it's really created a little bit of a runway for me in how it is I want to live. And
Mhm.
yeah, so the rules of Saint Benedict is something that I kind of keep in my backpack all the time. It talks about
Okay.
hospitality, all these things. So that's been super helpful for me.
Yeah, I have a close friend that's not a believer, and I was telling her, I'm like, actually, scripture aligns up with most of the things you're already doing and practicing.
Yes.
These are just good rules to live by, even if you don't believe
Yes.
you're uniquely created for
Absolutely.
prayer. So,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
Okay. Well, my last question for you, and I'll let you go, is what is something you can't stop talking about?
Oh, pickleball.
Oh,
I'm that guy. I just need to let everybody know. If you do follow me on Instagram, it's going to be
uh-huh.
a lot of pickleball. I turned 50, and when I turned 50, I was like, okay, like I think I want to try pickleball, and I'm
Me-
so good at it that
oh,
I'm doing tournaments, I'm doing all these things. So I just love pickleball because it's so inclusive. 80-year-olds can play it, 17-year-olds can play it, and I have a blast playing it every single day. So that's what I can't stop talking about.
Okay, I'm gonna admit this here. It's really embarrassing. I don't know how pickleball varies from tennis.
Let me give you 20 seconds. Okay.
Okay.
Just 20 seconds to add here. Pickleball, it's the court size is probably a third of a tennis court. So it's tiny.
Okay.
The net's shorter. The balls you play with are like the little wiffle balls that you used to play in the front yard
Oh,
with the
yeah.
holes in them, plastic.
Yeah.
So it moves a lot slower. And since you're playing with another partner, you basically aren't running near as much. And so it's just, it's light aerobic exercise as opposed to tennis. It's just a lot harder. So it's just a
Okay.
simpler, more accessible version of tennis.
Okay. I know it's been a thing for the past year and a half, but I'm
Yeah, yeah.
embarrassed to ask. I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that is.
Oh no,
Everyone's
I'm a safe place for you. Just ask me anytime.
well, Carlos, this book is excellent. Like I said, I'm almost done with it, and it has been a blessing to me. So I hope this
Oh,
conversation was also a blessing to the listeners. And thank you for writing it and sharing your experience.
thanks so much.